Boris Johnson has once again inserted himself into the global fray, this time taking issue with Donald Trump's inflammatory statements about Ukraine. And it tells you what a statesman Boris actually is, that people pay attention to what he said. And he's got something more to say than Starmer and Badenoch. The former Prime Minister dismissed Trump's assertion that Ukraine started the war with Russia, and he likens it to the claim that the United States had attacked Japan at Pearl Harbor. What a brilliant point. But while Johnson is making an intervention, albeit one tinged with characteristic bluster, Farage has opted for silence, an omission that speaks volumes, doesn't it? Trump's latest remarks, which include branding Zelensky a dictator and falsely claiming his approval ratings have plummeted to 4%, have drawn swift condemnation from across the UK political spectrum. Starmer, in a tactful rebuke, affirmed British support for Ukraine's democratically elected leader. The Conservative leader, Kemi Badenoch, I use the term loosely, similarly rejected Trump's comments, saying that Zelensky bravely stood up to Putin's illegal invasion. And even the former Defense Secretary, Ben Wallace, weighed in, accusing Trump of spreading genuine fake news. Johnson never want to shy away from an opportunity to garner a headline and reassert his relevance, positioned himself as a transatlantic mediator, stating that Trump's remarks were not intended to be historically accurate, but to shock Europeans into action. His call for Europe to man up and step up is a phrase as boorish as it is simplistic, and it reflects his broader frustration with what he perceives as European dithering in support for Ukraine. Yet his attempt to justify Trump's statements as a calculated provocation rather than mere reckless rhetoric appears a stretch even by Johnson's standard. Let's stain the sofa! Ha! In contrast, Farage's silence, I'm not shallow, is as deafening as it is revealing. And the former Brexit champion, whose long-standing admiration for Trump is well documented, has, it appears, opted for strategic ambiguity in the form of shutting his mouth. You very rarely find that Farage shuts his mouth, but on this occasion, having got nothing better to say, realizing that almost anything that he does say is likely to cause problems, having previously questioned Britain's continued support for Ukraine, Farage now finds himself in a precarious position. Does he stand by his idol's increasingly unhinged statements, or does he risk alienating Reform UK's nationalist base, many of whom remain divided on the Ukraine question? Farage's muted response, or a lack of response, or absence of response, suggests he hasn't yet decided what to say, or he hasn't found somebody who will approve of his take on this. And what does Richard Tice have to say? Well, Richard Tice is probably stuck in Dubai, and this was the part-time MP. European leaders, meanwhile, are grappling with the fallout from Trump's remarks. With the US and Russia engaging in negotiations that conspicuously exclude Ukraine, Johnson's argument that Europe should be leveraging frozen Russian assets to compensate for US military aid may not be entirely without merit. However, his framing of Trump as some Machiavellian genius manipulating Europe into action is wishful thinking at best and opportunistic flattery at worst. It is, however, brilliant, and it provides a reason for Trump's madness. As Starmer prepares for talks in Washington, the UK government needs to carefully navigate this precarious transatlantic relationship, barely a few weeks old. And while Trump may be shocking Europe into action, it is crucial that Britain remains steadfast in its support for Ukraine, regardless of whether Johnson tries to rehabilitate his own statesmanship image, his own statesman-like image, his own value as a statesman, or whether Farage continues to dance in strategic silence, dad dancing, I suppose, jiving next to the sofa. Oh, the sofa's been stained. Well, that's not Farage's fault, is it?